City Council meeting on April 7th, 2022. We have asked Council Member Cox if she would lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and then following that, we'll have a reverence by Council Member Marinoni.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
We ask that you be with us this day as we make decisions and that we do so in the best interest of our community. We're grateful for the opportunity we have to serve the public and for those in attendance. We ask that you bless us with more water so that we may be able to raise crops and do as we need this summer. We're grateful for all that God does for us in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
Amen. I'd just like to mention one item on the agenda, item 7, when we like to maybe rearrange that just a little bit under the disconnect. First of all, when we get to that point, we'll have those who are requesting the disconnect come up and explain why they're requesting it. And then after that, we'll respond to that with our city staff. And then following that, then we'll have any public comments. So if there's not any disagreement with that, we'll just follow that order when we get down to that agenda item. Okay, at this time, if you've had...
Are there any other citizen comments
for things that are on the agenda. Yeah, is there anyone else that may have comments on other items on the agenda? If so, we would invite you to come to the microphone, state your name and address, and then take about 3 minutes. So at this time, we would open that up for other agenda items, not other agenda items, but any agenda item that's on the agenda. Boy, I'm telling a mouthful there. But anyway, we've opened it up for that at this time. Okay, seeing none, we'll close the public comment, and we'll move on to the minutes. Each member of the council, which we're just 3 of them here tonight, so at least we have a quorum. But if you've had a chance to review those minutes, and are there any amendments or corrections that need to be made to those? If not, we'll entertain a motion to approve those.
I'll make a motion to approve the minutes dated March 17th, 2022. I'll second it.
Here we have a motion and a second. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, those were approved. Okay, at this time, we'll ask any member of the council to declare any conflicts of interest that they might have with any items on the agenda. So are there any conflicts of interest that you might have? Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the next item. You should have received reports, budget reports and that you've had a chance to review since our last meeting. Any questions on those? Okay, we'll just move on to the next agenda item. Now we're down to item 7. We received a petition for a disconnect from Hooper City for property that's located up on 5600 South and approximately 4300 West. Is there anyone here that is representing that petition? Okay, so if you'll just state your name and address and kind of explain to us why you've petitioned the city for this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of council, my name is Bruce Baird. I'm counsel for the project. My address in Salt Lake City is 2150 South, 1300 East, Suite 500. I appreciate the opportunity to say hello to you tonight. The simple question is this: can the the city provide service to the property? As far as I have been able to determine, various correspondence, etc., discussions with the engineers, the city is not presently able to provide service to the property. And without the ability to provide municipal services to the property, the law, I believe, in Utah is pretty clear, based on a case I won 14 years ago against Bluffdale City, that vacant land that cannot be serviced by a local government deserves to be able to choose, essentially think of it as a divorce situation, which parent it wants to live with, which parent is willing to provide the food, the schooling, the services, etc. And the Supreme Court's pretty clear about that. If one local government can provide those services and the other one is unwilling to do that, then a local government, then that property is entitled to choose which parent it wants to live with. And it's that simple. If there is an ability for the city to provide services here, we have not heard of that ability. I'll leave it at that. You've read my letter. I would like a chance, Mr. Mayor, to respond after the city makes its comments or any public citizens. Other than that, I'm going to keep this pretty short because you've had a chance to read my letter. You've talked to your counsel, and I hope you've read the case, because the Bluffdale Mountain Homes case is the controlling Supreme Court case and has been for the last 14 years. And in my opinion, as the counsel who won that case, this is pretty simple. I note from the map of your city and Hooper City, your city and Roy City, that there's a couple of other properties on the west side of the property that have also been moved into Roy City, and this property seems to be in the same situation to me, and we believe that it should be moved out. The only other option here is, if you don't move it out, is, to be blunt, expensive and painful litigation. Bluffdale spent over $250,000 in its effort to keep its property, and it lost at the Supreme Court. I would hope that the city of Hooper has better things to do with its money than to try to keep in its jurisdiction property that it cannot serve. I'm happy to answer any other questions, and I'm happy to respond after the public comment. Otherwise, thank you very much for your time. Yes, ma'am.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
With you suggesting the example of Bluffdale,
Yes, ma'am.
I'm assuming that that property was also borderlining a separate city.
I'm sorry?
I'm assuming that that
Yes, ma'am. That is
property
correct.
is bordering another city.
That is correct.
Okay, so if in the Supreme Court they're saying that that's, anybody can do that, does it have to be on a city property line? Does that only apply to that, or because that could apply to anybody that has property anywhere that's not serviced by the city?
No, you've actually raised a very good question, Ms. Arthur. The answer is generically, the test is a little tricky, and it's sort of, is the property on the periphery of the city, and is it next to another city? And the question is, again, I'm going to analogize it to a divorce case. Which parent can provide the better home, can provide the services needed to support the property? So it's not any property inside the city. It generally applies to boundary properties.
Boundary properties, okay, thank you.
And you were exactly correct in that. And frankly, the Supreme Court asked that exact same question, by the way. So feel good about yourself for asking the same question that the Supreme Court asked.
Can I ask you a question?
Yes.
Were they unable to provide all services or just one?
Well, the key part is, are they providing a services that's necessary to enable the development of the property?
Okay.
It's pretty easy to provide certain kinds of services. I mean, police cars move. It's relatively easy to provide police services. The question is, can you provide the key services? Water, because you can't develop without water. You can't develop without sewer. Those are the two primary services that I believe are essential to the test of development I'm going to call it orphan property. And again, I'm going to stick with my analogy of a divorce. If you can't provide food and you can't provide water, those are the key services.
Okay, so So in consideration of that, you're talking about like a development,
Yes, ma'am.
okay?
Yes,
So
ma'am.
not just homes, a development.
Well, homes are a development. I mean,
Well, you understand my question, more of a development process.
correct. I
than
mean,
just homes.
the correction, the argument would be the difference between, and I don't want to use, I'm going to use the phrase, but it's sort of highest and best use. If you can't provide the services necessary to obtain, to grow and develop, again, I'm going to stick back with my childhood divorce metaphor. If you can't provide the services necessary to allow the child to thrive, and the other parent can, then that's the parent that should have custody of the child. And as far as I know, Hooper cannot, or is not willing to, provide the services necessary to allow this child to thrive.
How about Roy City? Has Roy City consented to supply all these services?
Well-
If they're one of the parents, have they consented to this?
The
Or
answer,
do they want this?
I believe the answer to that is yes. And the reason, the tricky part about this, ma'am,
Now, when you believe, have you,
the tricky part about this is, and I've dealt with this in, I think, 4 situations where neighboring cities are involved. And I'm trying to avoid other parts of my metaphor. It's fairly common for a neighboring city to not look aggressive and say, we want you, but it is clear from a systems engineering point of view that Roy City can provide the services necessary to develop this property.
so then they haven't said they wanted to develop this property, they haven't,
No, they haven't
Okay.
officially said that. And the normal way that would be done is to provide a request for a boundary line adjustment. And we've actually requested that, which is to ask Roy City to take the property and Hooper to let the property go. In my experience, having done this more than twice actually, it's sort of unlikely to get the other city to look like they're being aggressive. There's no reason to believe that Roy would not accept the property as they have accepted other properties to the west of the road and provide the same services that they are providing to other properties to the west of the road.
I may not be correct, but I don't think those were, I think that was done when Hooper incorporated. Am I correct in that? Do you?
I don't know the answer to that
Well, I
question.
was asking our city engineer.
And you may well be correct, Ms. Cox, I don't know. I'm just looking at the map, and it's a weird-looking map if that's what happened.
Relative to that boundary that includes some of those.
Yeah, those
that-
two properties.
That was part of the incorporation boundary.
Okay,
back
okay,
then.
so they were not, that was not done after.
And I may be incorrect in that, Ms. Cox, and I thank you for pointing that out to me. My point is, the ability to service those properties in the exact similar situation, if those properties migrate into Roy, if this property migrates into Roy, is the same as it is for those properties. Those properties can get service in Roy. This property cannot get service in Hooper. And I have yet to hear anyone explain to me why this property cannot get service in Hooper. And if it, can get service in Hooper. And if it can get service in Hooper, that's a different situation. But as far as I know, it can't get service in Hooper.
We should be able to have some of that
Are there
explained.
any other questions you have?
No.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, members of the council. I'm here to answer any questions if you have them.
Okay, we'll just turn some time over to our city staff to maybe clarify some of these things. As far as our ability to service this property.
Well, I don't know exactly what's meant by the city provide service. I've been doing this with this city for 21 years since the moment you incorporated. We've had development all over the place where we did not provide service. They provided service so they could serve their development, and tied into the trunk line that goes to Central Weaver and built force mains and lift stations and everything else. So I don't know exactly what is intended by the city is supposed to provide. But I will go ahead and explain what's happening relative to the master planning we're doing elsewhere in the city, and also also what includes this piece down here. Now, I don't know of any city that allows, clearly this, in order for all this property to be served, some of it has to be pumped. Okay, there's a low spot right through the middle of it, the slough, the Howard Slough, and you can't get gravity from here to the street, so some of it's gonna have to be pumped. I don't know any city that allows just individual pump stations every time a developer comes along. They regionalize lift stations to take care of the maximum area possible. Okay, it just makes common sense. Otherwise, Public Works out here in Hooper would be maintaining 500 lift stations every time a new development came along. There's a person sitting right here in this room who pioneered a lift station for a development in a regional area. It's $1 million. Okay, yeah, there's 60 lots involved, but it's still $1 million that they had to do in order to provide service for their development, which we accepted as part of what we do as a city. Now this area down here, I'm just going to draw on this. This area down here, this is the parcel. There are four long parcels along here. This is undeveloped, and so we were asked as part of everything else we're looking at for future sewer, hey, what could happen in this area relative to our policy and our ordinance for regional sewer lift stations. Okay, I'm just going to kind of generally point some things out. Okay, the slough is the low spot. Clearly, everything drains from both sides to the slough. Somewhere down in it, hit that again. Somewhere in this area along here is a low spot, whether it's on this side or that side. Okay, it's a low area, and I've looked at elevations. I'm going to put that elevation 40. It's actually 4240. Okay, is the elevation in that low spot. Around the edges, here's a 45. There's a 45 here. I think this was a 46. Another 45 over here. Okay. So there's 5 feet of fall from all those corners to this low spot. I scribbled on my own drawing. It's about 800 feet on the diagonal to get to that low spot. Okay. Well, nothing gets built in a development, a full development on a diagonal. There's always streets and things and other easements and things that have to be dealt with. So you say, well, okay, how deep would the sewer be to flow from here to here? Well, rather than say 800 feet, you say 1,200 feet. So you got 1,200 feet, and the minimum slope on an 8-inch sewer line is 0.4% times 0.4%. I can't scribble on this. So that's 4.8 feet of fall required to get from here to here in 1,200 feet. And it's actually 800 feet directly, but you wind around to get things. Okay, so there's 5 feet of fall, so if you start 8 feet here, you're dropping 5 feet in the sewer, you're 8 feet right here. And all you gotta do is figure out how to, from one side to the other, get under the slough. Now maybe that's 12 feet. Okay, I don't know, I haven't been out there measuring the slough. It may not only be 8 feet. So you can drop a regional lift station in this spot, be reasonably deep, which 10 to 12 feet is reasonably deep. There's a lift station being built in Salt Lake right now that's 35 feet deep, okay? Just to accommodate development, because we're doing it in my office. So, somebody's gonna have to pioneer a regional lift station in this area to provide sewer. We're not doing it. Nobody else, we haven't done it for others. Yes, we put the vacuum sewer system in. We did that in about half the city because we were told by the state, if we don't, there will never be another home built out here because the groundwater or the groundwater issues with septic systems. Anyway, back on where I was, you build a lift station. A lift station was built years ago, right here. Right here, down in here. They built a force main that came out here, goes out here, goes all the way up into West Haven. They built that. We didn't build that. They built that in order to serve. Okay? What we're saying is, okay, this is a spot for a regional lift station. And others have had to go out and work with easements from the neighboring properties to make their development work. Come out here, get an easement, come along here, come over here and tie in. That's as far as you gotta go. Okay, maybe these property owners aren't gonna accommodate. Well, then figure out a way to get here, get out on the road and get here and work in the existing rights of way. Okay? That's planning. That's what can be provided to serve this area. And there's nothing complicated about it. We just don't provide it. It's part of a development that has to happen. So, I mean, just a real quick discussion. Any questions? Jared, anything to add?
I think you've covered everything that I would have to add to it.
I have a question to ask her.
If that's okay with the council, with the mayor and the council, sure.
That makes complete sense.
Well, do you have any more to present? Or maybe
No,
we
that's a
just-
simple discussion right there as to how that whole area can be served. Now, whether it starts with just one and grows, or whether they get together and do something collaboratively. I know there's been discussion with these other property owners here in the city. I wasn't involved in that, so someone else can weigh in on that, but, you know, it's just,
You know, the question is it sewerable? That's everything I've had here. That's what kept coming up, you know.
well,
It can't be sewer.
if you compare it to what is happening elsewhere in the city, there are major infrastructure projects being done by development. And the question is it reasonable? Heck, sometimes I just scratch my head, but they still go forward and they get the work done because they want to develop the property. So I don't know what's reasonable. Sometimes I said, well, I don't think that property owner is going to make a nickel on that, but they meet our standards. They do what they need to develop sewer, water, land drains, secondary water, everything that's required, along with all the other utilities that we don't even deal with, and somehow it works. So we can take
All right,
Sheldon.
sure, we'll take, and Sheldon, if you wouldn't mind just standing up with the microphone so everybody can hear you, and tell us your name and address and ask your question.
Sheldon Greener, 5638 South, 6800 West. I don't know if it's on there. I was wondering, like, it seems like, wouldn't they have that same issue tied into Roy with that little spot in the middle?
I honestly don't see how this part of the property gets anywhere close to the depth that is needed in the street out here. So,
That's what I was wondering.
in a gravity situation.
Thank you.
Okay. At this time then, we'll turn it over to the public. If you have any public comments, if you'd like to stand up to the microphone, if you have any questions, again, we would ask that you state your name and address, and if you have any questions.
I'll jump back up since I was just up here, so I don't have to get my stuff again, right?
No, you're good, Jill. I still
so-
consider it you.
So, like, in my opinion, obviously just my opinion, I'm a lawyer, I don't represent the city in this matter tonight. To me, it just comes down to, it's a, use of property issue is what it's really, they're undermining our serviceability with a use, is really what they're looking to do, is change the use for it. So, for me, as a Hooper resident and having lived up in that area, and I know other people here tonight have lived currently in this area, we as citizens, when we buy a house or whatever, we're looking at the future land use map to see what that is, what that's going to be. Currently, that area is, I believe, it's zoned future land use is 1 acre lot. So, if I had just bought a house or even lived in a house for 20 years, seeing that that's what is been expected it's going to be, I expect that's what it's going to be. I don't expect, after I've made my life there, to have something change, drastically at the last minute. And, another city get involved and all of a sudden it's 4-story apartment complex is my backyard. So that's, my take on what I really think the underlying issue is here is a usage, not serviceability that we're trying to spin it to.
Steers. I live at 4375 West, 5700 South in Hooper, so where that double cul-de-sac is. And kind of just to piggyback off of what this gentleman just said, we moved out of Roy to kind of get, I know we just barely moved out of Roy, but it just came down to finding the right house with that double cul-de-sac. That's what we love. But it was moved to Hooper or Plain City. Those were the two cities we were choosing to move to. And one thing I really liked about Hooper was the zoning laws, like what can be built. Hooper wasn't trying to be a big city. I grew up in a small city in Colorado, and that's kind of what I was looking for my children to grow up into. So that's why I chose Hooper. And so when I came to this meeting, it was kind of just to also find out what the plan was for this lot. When I got the letter in the mail, I kind of took it as a developer seeing it as Hooper will not cater to their development needs, whether that's apartments, I don't know, like what kind of housing, commercial. But for my takeaway from this, after hearing the developer, this gentleman over here, kind of felt like he knows that Hooper's not going to give him what he's looking for when it comes to what he wants to develop, and also threatening and bullying the city council with threatening to can charge the city up to $250,000 in legal fees, that he's willing to do that. I feel like any kind of developer that's looking and threatening that right to open argument and not open about what's being built there to the residents is kind of a shady backdoor deal. So those are just my opinions, my thoughts, and I'd like to thank you for my time.
Hello, Natalie Stewart, 5067 South, 5300 West. I want to echo what these two gentlemen have said. I don't live per se near that area, but we've seen this time and time again. People come in and try to circumvent the system, and they go around the process and try to get what they want, and it's all about the dollar. The first thing that I wrote down here, the last gentleman, I don't remember your name, but he said threatened, and I wrote threatened and bullied, and that's exactly the way I felt. I was instantly on the defense, and I imagine you all probably were too, because that doesn't feel good to be talked to like that. Whether you're an attorney or not, I don't really care your title. There's water. There is no water for any of us. So, whether you live in Hooper, whether you live in Roy, I don't really care where you live. There's no water for anybody. So that's another issue and a concern that I have. The tax base is not going to come to us. I get it's probably not a whole lot, but it's something to think about. The question was asked, what's the impact, or has Roy City given the okay? I feel like it was kind of a shady. Cindy, you asked that, and they have not probably even been talked to. I don't know, maybe they have, but it doesn't sound to me like they have approved it. And what would the impact to Hooper be? I mean, what is the impact to us? Somewhere down the road, somebody's going to come and say, well, it looks to me like it's part of Hooper. Hooper City, you're responsible for it. Roy say, we're saying, well, no, it's going to be Roy. Somewhere down the line, it's going to come back to Hooper. And I don't know what it's going to be, or what the impact's going to be, but somehow, some way, these developers, these shady developers, do stuff like that. So, thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Again, this is a public hearing, so we would encourage anyone that has any comments to come to the microphone and.
Hello, I'm Roger Owens. I'm a next door neighbor to this project. I'm at 5535 South. And I just think before they get too far into it, they really ought to go to Roy City or go out and get a depth on that main that they think they can tie onto. Because I've got the house next door, I'm 180 feet back off the road. And I've got a shallow crawl space, and I'm laid pretty flat on that sewer. I wouldn't want to be any flatter. So I don't know if you even have if you can even justify doing something without lifting it either way, so. But the house next to me is 5573, and that sewer is backed up in that basement, does go down, when it does, some of it gets flooded. They've pumped raw sewage into that slough twice while they were working on that lift station. And I'm not gonna put up with that again either, so. It's just something I would check out and do your homework before you plan on going either way.
Can I ask you a question? Which lift station would service that?
Oh, there's one on the corner of 4300 and 5500 that I believe would be the one that
Okay.
serves it, Roy City lift
Roy City
station.
one?
Yeah.
Okay.
And that would make that development, whatever they do, would be the lowest one on the whole system.
So we do have one emailed resident's comment. He couldn't be here tonight. So I'm just going to read that in real quick. So it's from Mark Yardley at 4430 West, 5700 South. And he writes, Hooper City Council, this is in regard to the property from the Stanley, I hope I say the last name right, Soho and Gail Soho Living Trust, located at approximately 5600 South and 4300 West. I'm going to be out of town for the city council meeting where this property is going to be discussed, so I just wanted my input that I am against allowing this property to be removed from Hooper City. This property is basically in my backyard, and I don't want to some other city allowing high-density housing to come in and devalue the whole area.
Okay, any other comments? Well, I would just like to mention, both our Public Works Director and myself had a chance to visit with a couple of the landowners. In fact, Mr. Owens, you was one of them. So our concern was, and one thing we wanted to know is that if a regional lift station was put in there, could there be an easement that would go along the west property line, along that fence line on the west end of this property, that would get us out to where they could be to a forced main? We first visited with Elliot Christensen, and he had no reservations about an easement. He felt like that would actually increase the value of his property, and going right along the property line, he wasn't one bit negative about that. And Mr. Owens, I don't know if he ever contacted you or not, but when we visited with you, you just wanted to make sure it was done right. I think you had some concerns just like you've shared tonight. I don't know that the easement, as long as you're dealt with fairly on the easement, I don't know that you really had any concern about that. Even though you did promise you would give one, Mr. Christensen, on the other hand, he would be willing to do that. I know that you didn't really feel like there was a problem if that easement went across the...
No, I just said I'd be willing to sit down at the table.
There you go.
I left it there.
Sure. So we did visit with both of those landowners. I also visited with the mayor of Roy City. And so he sent me an email. And I got this just a couple days ago. He said, Mayor Fowlers, this is the first time we've heard about this. As we talked earlier, Roy City's position is we will only consider this board adjustment if Hooper City Council supports this. There is still no guarantee that Roy City Council will agree to it, even if your council supports it. So I really, from some letters I received earlier, I thought that Roy City had been talked to about this and actually had agreed to it. But at this point, they have not been, and I believe you indicated that. But anyway, that's just some of the background information we have pertaining to this disconnect. Before we close public comment, I'll just ask one more time, seeing that this is a public hearing, is there anyone else that has any comments they'd like to make?
Mr. Mayor, as the applicant, may I respond briefly?
Okay, we did agree to that at first.
I appreciate that, sir. I'm just checking.
Okay, no, we're...
A little bit to add to it. Just, I would like to know, is it too early in the game to know what's being planned to be built over there? Are we too early for that? Or?
Well, I don't think that's an unfair question. We haven't received any type of development plans, or we don't have any of that. You know, usually there'd be something that we might have some type of reference that would say this is the type of development we're planning to put on this piece of ground that's going to be disconnected, or that we're requesting a disconnect. We haven't received any type of development
3 acres. 3 acres. So you're gonna zone it down to half acres after this all happens?
Get more than that.
Or more than that. So, yeah, and I think it's personally, it's premature to even come to this city council. I feel personally, this is my own opinion, I feel like somebody has come in here and brought it to city council in Hooper who has not even talked to Roy City. We just found that out, and that's good to know. And I feel like it's kind of being under the table, being shady, so.
Okay, are any other comments? Okay, we invite you to come to the microphone and state your name and where you live.
I'm Steve Austin, 3892 South, 5500 West in Hooper. I'm just curious what gave these gentlemen the idea that Hooper wouldn't service it. Like, where did that contention come from? Are they not getting a response? What specifically, what nobody's brought up is, where did that come from?
I can't answer where that originated from.
I mean, well, for an attorney to come in here and threaten to sue the city, are they not getting a response? Or, like, what specifically ignited this conversation? Is it a lack of response?
Jared, you know.
I can tell you originally Chris Cave, who's a land planner for Reeves and Associates, sent us a request to look into the development of this property, and his first request was how can it be sewered and how can the water line be looped? And we responded back that the best way to sewer this was a regional lift station that took care of those 4 properties, and he said we'd look into it, and that's the end of that email chain.
So he said he'd look into it, but it was not, there wasn't a final response. Was there like a formal rejection? I mean, because there's an attorney, I mean, just as a citizen, I'm not involved in this project right now, but as a citizen sitting here, you got an attorney coming in to threaten to sue the city. You know, we don't have the resources in Hooper City to fight those kinds of lawsuits. So where is that aggression coming from? Specifically, there's got to be a little bit more to the story.
Obviously, I did respond to Chris Cave, you know, and there was no interest to disconnect from Hooper City. We didn't, and it could be sewered. But Hooper City, as I think, as Tracy, our city engineers explained, usually the developer steps in and has some responsibility to put in that infrastructure.
Did the developer reject doing that? Like, what did the developer say? No, we're not interested in putting in that lift station? Or?
The discussion did go back and forth, Jared, unless you received something that I haven't read, but no, there wasn't a discussion that went back and forth like that.
There's nothing in the letter that we received.
And we received that in December of last year.
But that's the last.
That's the thing, it was just about a disconnect.
Because my concern, not about this development, but as the city as a whole, like, it is not news to anybody in here. The Hooper City has a reputation of resisting development of all kinds. And like, I love the vision of Hooper City. I think it's noble. I want space away from people more than anybody else. There's a city, or a citizen rather. But I bought 2.5 acres to get that space, right? So like, I respect every citizen that's like, hey, we need space, we don't want development. But at the same time, every night when I get on and read KSL, all I hear is housing crisis, affordability. Where's everybody gonna go? What can we do to lower the price of housing? So as a citizen, not a builder, what's the plan? You know, I mean, when we resist those type of things, eventually what happens is Amazon comes in, or Northrop Grumman, or somebody that has a whole lot more money and a whole lot more lawyers, and they won't be looking for a subdivision. They won't give a dang what you guys say, and they'll have their corporate lawyers and they'll get it approved. And we've seen it happen in other cities. So is as a citizen looking from the outside in, I'm concerned about that. Like our vision to resist all development is noble, but it's not realistic.
But I think we're getting a little, anyway,
Yeah, I
look to your right there. We,
I
you know,
think it's-
future, but I think that's taking us off track from what.
Yeah, but I think you'd be shocked to know how much building is going on and how much hasn't even started yet.
Yeah, I'm just letting you know, and I'll feedback my time, but it isn't news out there that development is resisted at Hooper, so.
We appreciate your opinion.
Can I comment real quick?
Sure.
And I don't want to be critical of their engineer, of the one who reached out to Jared, but that company is a company who has done an awful lot of design work out here on behalf of developers. If they were really serious and got a response that said regional lift station and didn't want to have somebody, you know, didn't want and really wanted to pay for it, I really believe something would have come back and said, okay, how do we make this work?
Are you talking about Reeves?
I am.
Okay.
Yeah, I
okay.
mean, not to be critical,
No, I know.
they've done a ton of work
Yes,
out
they
here.
have.
And it seems like if they really wanted to make it work, they would have responded back to Jared and said, okay, so what does that involve? How do we get that done? But nothing came back. And it wasn't a developer, it was their engineer or their planner, so.
Okay, any other comments? Okay,
So I couldn't see on this chart what you were talking about. Explain it over here. Can you, Tracy, or?
Oh.
Turn that.
I erased it.
Well, just point where your lines would go if you were putting sewer.
Well, I mean, exactly where the lines would go is a little bit of a tough question because you'd have to see how the whole thing laid out. But as I mentioned, the low spot is in this area, part of this property or part of that property, but in this area. And everything can be gravity fed to that low spot very easily because there's 5 feet of fall. And if you start out 8 feet, you're going to end up 8 feet, and all you got to do is be deep enough to be able to get under the slough from one side to the other. Once that's in place, you have to pump it somewhere. The lift station pumps, and we've talked now about the possibility of a force main that comes out this way, goes along this property line, Owens and Christensen, and has to tie in right there to existing facilities that now take it another 3,000 feet north, that they don't have to worry about. So there is something there to tie into already, and the other choice, if for some reason this couldn't be worked out, figure out a way to get out here. If Roy's so willing to work, put the force main down their street and come down the highway and connect. So, yeah, that's what I was showing over there, Reed.
Thank you.
are there any other comments? Okay, invite you back and.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, members of council. First of all, I appreciate what Mr. Allen indicated, and he's, in some ways, one of the things I always like to do is acknowledge when someone is correct. In general, cities don't build cities, developers build cities. Developers provide for the infrastructure, and I appreciate you shaking your head because we all know that's true. And the second thing that I point out is that there is no such thing as an engineering problem. Fill in the blank, Mr. Allen. There's only a
It's
financial
a money problem. Yeah.
Thank you.
You can build anything if you have the funds.
Thank you. The problem here is that what the city is doing by the way it's operating with this requirement for a regional facility is attempting to put a public function on a private developer with property that the private developer doesn't control. The city doesn't have a plan to, for example, and it could, if the city would express a willingness to condemn the easement, which frankly should cost nothing because it adds value to the property. If the city was willing to work with a solution as opposed to putting $1 million plus burden on a developer to propose the regional system, if the city was willing to cooperate and help with that proposal, I wouldn't be here. I apologize if there was some lack of communications about alternative solutions, but as I understand it, the city's position was, The only way for this developer to solve it is to build $1 million project, acquire on its own without the ability to have eminent domain easements for the property, and then pump it somewhere. And that's my understanding of what the city's position was, which left the property essentially unserviceable at the moment. There may be alternative solutions, and I appreciate the mayor being willing to discuss those alternative solutions. If there were alternative solutions, such as an assessment area, a impact fee system for this project, city condemnation of easements, then I wouldn't be here. The engineer's job is to solve those kind of problems, and I have no doubt that Mr. Allen and his team could solve those kinds of problems. The problem is that as we sit here today, the city has put that burden by way of its requirements on a property owner that does not have the ability nor the obligation to serve everyone else, because the developer of this property, the owner of this property, does not have the ability to do it. So if there's another way to do it, that's fine. But otherwise, the city needs to let us out, because we can solve the problem ourselves. If not, if the city wants to solve it, that's a different matter. This property, and I got to take a few seconds, because most of the people who say, quote, shady developers and shady deals, and I moved here because I want open space. I look at these maps, and these are lovely homes. They're lovely homes. I've driven by them before. I understand what they are. What people are saying is, you can't even have what we already have, because you have to provide a solution, a regional solution, that otherwise the city has provided or worked through. And that's simply not fair, and that's not contemplated by the disconnection statute. So perhaps the thing to do is to not necessarily vote on this tonight, but to sit down and figure out whether there's a solution that can be done that will allow this property to get the same benefits of its surrounding property without putting the burden on the developer all by itself that they can't financially or legally meet all by themselves. Thank you very much.
Okay, we'll close public comment on our public hearing and bring this back to council for discussion. Is there any discussion on this petition for disconnect?
I don't know about discussion. I mean, I have some comments, I guess.
Well, that's among the council here.
Personally, this is not a development issue. I mean, not at all. Hooper's a very unique place, and people can perceive how they want to perceive about what goes on and what can happen here. This is strictly a disconnect issue. And I feel the questions were answered adequately, that it could be serviced, and it's not our responsibility to build those services necessarily, because we have had other developers that have built those if they want to. So I'm absolutely against disconnect.
Okay, any other discussion?
I feel the same way as Cindy. I think it's pretty cut and dry things. We have the ability for them to connect onto everything that they need.
Any other discussion?
I do think there are a lot of unanswered questions as to, as some of the comments were, well, what's the plan for the property, that kind of thing, and getting a solution together. But at the same time, there's a solution in front of us. And is this developer any different than any of the other developers in Hooper that have had to do the same thing, whether it's $1 million, people with $1 million in their pockets already, or people without? Every developer's had to still follow the same guidelines.
I have a question for Tracy.
Yeah, sure.
I presume that there has to be a lift station to service that property regardless, even to get it to any existing sewer.
That's correct.
So what's the difference in cost in doing that and doing it?
I don't know what Roy's standard looks like. Okay, we have a particular standard. Our standard, the way it's shown right now, is for a much larger area. It could be scaled down, so I don't think $1 million is even close. But Roy may allow something that can be built for $150,000. I don't know their standard. Ours is probably gonna, because we require backup generator, we require that to be in a little building. We require a little higher level of pumps and things. It's gonna be more than that, but I can't tell you what the difference would be right now.
Would those things be required if they were pumping just for their property as opposed to a regional station?
They would be. The difference would be, we'd probably have a little bit smaller wet well where everything flows to, probably a little smaller pumps, maybe smaller generator, but all those other things are still in our standard for any lift station. Yes, Reed.
And if they were to build a regional station, your impact fees are set up to allow them to recover whatever
We would,
more than the cost of
yeah,
building
what we're doing right now with our master planning is we're developing regions, and each of those regions, based upon what it's gonna cost for that region to develop a lift station and take their force main somewhere to tie into some existing, will have their own impact fee. This one here will have their own impact fee, based upon what we believe the cost of this to be, to get that built and the force main, and then anything that comes into there will participate in the cost, in the reimbursement for the difference between a simple one, a local one, and a regional.
And that's what, have you done that in other areas in the city?
We have, yes. Yeah, there are others. I mean, it's not gonna be this one person pioneer this thing and, hey, sorry, you eat the thing. Yeah, others are gonna participate in some fashion. And others have expressed that they're very anxious to participate, at least Mr. Elliott along the front, from what I understand. So.
Has anyone explored any of those issues with the two of you?
No.
For this property? The regional station, the individual lift station, the getting of a right-of-way to go over to where the force main is? Have they talked to you about those things?
No, not me, maybe you.
No. And the same engineer designed others, so I think they're aware, but they haven't specifically about this property.
It sounds to me like there hasn't been enough conversation both ways. I mean, it sounds like.
But the other thing, the legal side will have to. We have told others, you've got to get from point A to point B. Go negotiate with those property owners and make it worth their while. And maybe that's not fair. I don't know. We've done that, and it still happens. You know, and so I guess I don't really understand that part of it. So that's another discussion I guess we need to understand from our legal team. So.
Now, if this gentleman that talked a few minutes ago that owns the adjoining property were to want to develop his property, would he have to find a way to get sewer to that property?
Sure.
So it would be to his benefit to work a system that would allow him to hook into that system. Does that make
Absolutely,
sense?
yeah. And honestly, with those narrow pieces like that, it's to everybody's benefit if they were to somehow combine so that they're not stuck in that strip to try to put a road and houses on both sides, particularly if the lots are going to need to be bigger in the new general plan, which I haven't really seen final yet, so it could be very difficult. But if they were combined, it could do something collaboratively. It would make a much better development overall anyway. So, and we've seen that happen as well.
Are you aware of any property on the west end, the west side of 4300, that has been allowed to go into Roy from Hooker?
There are a few homes, I believe.
That were there when the cities were organized. Anything that's been allowed to happen since then?
Not that I can think of. Not new development.
I'm trying to think of all of Freedom goes to their lift station. All of that, yeah, all of that still goes to that regional lift station by Freedom Elementary.
And that 4300 4300 South has been the agreed upon boundary between the two cities.
The west side of 4300
4300
South,
West.
or 4300 West is the boundary. They own all of the right of way west of, all the road, Roy does. We own the west boundary of that road, the 4300,
And what sewer district is this property in?
Central Weaver.
What sewer district or what sewer plant does the Roy line that goes through 4300 empty into?
North Davis.
Yeah.
North Davis.
In fact,
So this is not even in the North Davis district, is it?
No.
in fact, Jared, I know we had some people from our region, our district, our sewer district, Central Weaver. What was your discussion with them about this?
They said that in order for the sewer to actually flow into Roy and go to North Davis, they would have to disconnect from Central Weber as well and annex into North Davis Sewer District, and they said that could be problematic.
Did they act like they just de-annexed that Central Weaver easily? I mean,
No, they didn't.
I wouldn't think so.
all right. If you have any questions, council have any other questions or any other discussion?
No,
Yeah.
I mean, the more discussion, the more clearer it is to me that, and I'll make a motion
Okay,
to deny the disconnect from Hooper City for the property located at approximately 5600 South, 4300 West, parcel number 09-075-0253.
okay, we have a motion. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? Okay, all those in favor?
Aye.
Were there any opposed? I think I saw them say that, so. Okay, so that disconnect has been denied. Okay, next on the agenda, we have a decision for a rezone request for the property located at 4512 West, 5500 South. Do we have a representative for this rezone? If you can just state your name and your address.
Hi, I'm Kyle Roberts. It's my wife, Cammy Roberts. We live at 4512 West, 5500 South, Hooper. I bought this property 4 years ago, and it was pretty dilapidated. And I've spent a lot of money fixing it up. I would like to make my permanent house here by subdividing this lot. It's a half acre and 3/4 of an acre is what I'm proposing. And I'm going to be really nice. Thank you, Mayor, for being here. I appreciate council members' time. Kind of a bad night to be here. But I've worked through the planning commission, and I'm sure they've sent you some information about that. And I'm the building contractor. This is where I plan on finishing out. So
You really improved the looks of the house. It looks very nice.
it's been a lot of work, but I enjoy it. Like,
It looks good.
been doing it forever. So, do you have any questions for me?
No. Tracy, I forgot to, well, not that I forgot, but we should have, do you have something to kind of
No,
explain on this?
I did not have anything to present.
Okay.
I wasn't even aware this was happening, so,
Okay.
This is
Well,
like,
it has come up through the planning commission, I know you've met with them, so.
and I wasn't there at that meeting. I had to be on that. So.
The rezone is basically to build next to it.
Excuse me?
The rezone is basically to build next to where
Yes,
you are
yes.
currently.
Yeah, I mean, I own the house there now, and I plan on keeping it just to have, just in case kids come back, or grandkids, and, finding houses, impossible for them, so.
Did the planning commission have any?
Initially, they had it, they wanted the one part to be moved up to a half acre minimum, so I was able to get a half acre and almost 3/4 of an acre. And the 3/4 of an acre is what I plan on building on, that portion to the west side. Set?
Any other questions? Okay.
Thanks for being nice, appreciate it.
Well, we'll bring this back to council. Is there any other discussion? If not, then we'll entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion to approve the, oh my gosh, I just lost my paper.
Do you need one?
Okay, thank you. I'll make a motion that we approve the rezone request for the property located at 4512 West, 5500 South, parcel number 090759248, from the R1 zone to the R2 zone for 5 years. I'll second it.
We have a motion and a second. Is there any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Okay, that passes. Okay, next on our agenda, we have an item that involves the franchise agreement for Connect, and we'll let Reed explain this to us and what actually we need.
As you recall, Connect came before the council a month or so ago and asked for approval for a franchise to put cable into the streets and right-of-ways of the city. That was approved, subject to the final approval of the contract and the ordinance by the mayor. At the same time, Utah Broadband, I think they're here today, are they not? Yeah. Was here making the same request that had been made by Connect a month or so before. So today, we've got two ordinances there, one for Connect and one for Utah Broadband. I'm suggesting that you look at those, but not pass them today. We'll provide that to Utah Connect and to Utah Broadband and to Connect. See if they have any comments before you do final approval. What I would suggest that you do is give the same approval to Utah Broadband that you gave to Connect, authorizing the franchise, putting off the passing of the ordinance until the next meeting, and leaving it to the mayor and I to work out the details of the contract with them. Hopefully we can pass that or approve that at the next meeting as well.
So, on these two, it says they both require a motion. So, do we just, for the franchise agreements, so.
I would think you want to just table those until the next meeting for the
Okay,
franchise.
okay, so I'll do that first. Can I make a motion that we table the motion to approve the ordinance for Connect's franchise and for the Utah Broadband franchise agreements? Okay.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
And then next,
Real quick, who seconded? Sorry. Okay, thank you.
Okay, and then we need to make a motion to approve a franchise agreement.
Not to approve the agreement, to approve the mayor and myself working out the details of the agreement
Oh, okay.
with them, giving them the same approval that Connect has.
Okay. Did you want to say anything before?
Do you have any questions for me?
You guys were gonna get together and kind of figure out scheduling on roads and,
Well,
We definitely will do that with Connect,
yeah, okay.
just to make sure we're trying to minimize our
Not a,
impact.
yeah.
yeah, if you do that with Connect and with Jared,
Yeah,
we're
we're
working
happy
here so
to
we
do
don't
whatever.
disrupt the city any more than necessary.
Yep, we actually spent a little bit of time with David Brown. He's the CEO for Connect. I hadn't met him prior to that last council meeting I was part of, and very agreeable, very easy to work with. He went to lunch with our CEO from Utah Broadband, and I think there's some synergies there between the two companies that I think will be very helpful for us, but also beneficial for the community in Hooper to have multiple options for internet service. So we have no issues working hand in hand with them, with the different departments within the city to make sure we're doing it in a way that everyone's happy with.
Thank you.
so Teresa, did you happen to get kind of notes on the motion that Reed was
Yeah.
helping us with?
We have the first motion was to table the franchise agreements. The second motion is for to approve the workout of the agreements before it comes back to the next meeting,
Okay.
so.
But I didn't word that very good, so.
But you can just say so moved.
Oh,
Approve.
whatever Teresa
You can
said.
say approve, your motion is to approve the franchise, subject to the final adopting of the ordinance the next meeting, and authorize the mayor and myself to work with the company to.
What Reed just said.
Beautiful.
Nobody else, Sean.
Okay, beautiful.
Words right out of
So
her mouth.
Okay.
I got it, we're good.
Okay, so we have a motion and a second. Any other discussion? All those in favor?
Okay.
Okay. So that motion was approved.
So we might just also, while we have the contract on the agenda, just talk a little bit about the things that we are still talking to Connect about, and I presume we'll be talking to Utah Broadband about similar issues. First is the franchise fee, and what we're suggesting go into the contracts for that would be that we impose whatever fee the Utah law allows, basically. Probably nothing if they do exactly what they're going to say at this point, but that may change. And if there are other things going through those lines that can be subject to a franchise fee, then the city wants to have the ability to do that. Second, there was some discussion about what happens if they got all of these facilities built and then they go out of business. And their suggestion is that they be required to take down anything that's above ground, because that would be offensive to have it there if it's not being used. But anything underground would just stay there. And I think the mayor's all right with that, and I think that probably makes sense. Third issue is insurance. We didn't really know what was reasonable to require for them to have insurance when they work in the right of way and somebody may get hurt as they dig holes. So what we did is put into the contract that we'd leave that open, and once the construction is about to stop or to start, they would have to come up with either some type of insurance that is agreeable to the city and make that agreement at that time. So it kind of leaves it open that there will be insurance coverage, but the amounts will be left to determine once they're ready to start work. Oh yes, the other one was what type of service will they provide to city buildings? And of course, what we'd like is the ability to use that service as an exchange for them using our right-of-ways. And hopefully both providers would be allow us to do that in city buildings. So those are some of the things under discussion.
And that includes
That
the
would-
stations that,
It would include pump stations, the cemetery buildings, the city buildings, the maintenance buildings, and so forth.
I'm sure you're gonna.
So I'll be back with you on some of those issues as well, I'm sure.
Yep, so there might be a delay depending on what part of the city we're working in before we can service each one of those different locations.
Yeah, until it went in front of it, there wouldn't be any.
Anytime we pass one, we're happy to provide service, that's simple enough.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so we did get those, both motions taken care of. The last item on our agenda tonight pertains to our American Rescue Plan Act funds. And Teresa, since she's our finance manager, will put on your other hat here for a minute and kind of explain to us maybe some of the changes there.
Okay, so as the finance manager, I get the fun job of trying to track what all the state funds are supposed to be doing and how they're reporting, and federal funds also. So this right here is my ARPA book. It's a lot of fun read if anybody ever wants to have a chance to read it. But what we're coming to right now, and ARPA is American Rescue Plan Act that was passed by Biden. The final ruling came out on January 27th of 2022. All the rulings go into effect as of April 1st, 2022. Hooper City is required to report the funding back to the federal and state governments once a year because we are a small entity because we have less than 10,000 residents. I think it's like under 50,000 or something like that. That puts us into the small city category. And so we have to file a report by April 30th claiming what our plans are for the ARPA money. There are 4 areas that it can go into. It can go into public sector revenues, Let me see if I can pull it up fast for you guys. There it is. Oops, I got happy clicking. So number 1 is public sector revenues, and number 2 is the public health and economic response. Number 3 is premium pay for essential workers, and then number 4 is for water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. For Hooper City, it's a great thing for our sewer system because it's something that we're definitely going to need some work on that we can use that fund for. But when it comes to the reporting, that's when it gets more complicated. I've attended a couple webinars on rules for reporting, and with our city and the circumstances that we're in, the best and the less strict way that we can use this money would be to actually claim the money under option number 1, which is the public sector revenues. Originally, when they first came out with this option, they had a calculation that each city had to do. Try to imagine with me that COVID didn't happen, and the path that the city was on for revenues. So we were going like this, straight up, okay? When COVID hit, that changed a lot of our revenues. Now, for the city, we've been very blessed. We have always continued to increase on our revenues, but instead of going like this, we're now going like this. And so you have all this middle ground that you can actually now claim as loss of revenues because of COVID. And you would have to do a lot of calculations, a lot of fun things that I'd enjoy, you guys probably not so much. But there was a lot of complaints that came back from pretty much every city across the nation saying that this is too complicated. And so when they went back and revised the rules, when they put out the January 27th rule, they changed it to no matter what, you do not have to do the calculation at all. Every city, no matter the size, can claim up to the 10 million or the amount of money that they're receiving in ARPA funds, which is ours is a little over $1 million. So that means that we can claim every cent of our ARPA funds as public sector revenues loss, meaning that we can use that money for any issue that is a city service that we provide. We can still use it for infrastructure, but if we use it in option number 4 for infrastructure, that means that we have a whole bunch of budgeting and levels that we have to report through that infrastructure thing, where if we use it under the public sector revenues, we pretty much just claim it, show that we used it for that as part of our standard rates of service that we provide. If we use number 1, I only have to do reporting once a year, where if we do number 4, which it has to be pretty much only for sewer or broadband, and that's where our money is tied. I have to report every single quarter or something like that. It's a lot more stringent on our reporting. And it does tie our hands a ton more. The reason I'm bringing this to you guys now is because I have to file a report, and to claim the public sector revenues, it has to be done at the very first. You get this one-time chance to claim this money. And so I have to do it now. And so I just need you guys to hopefully agree with me that we can claim it under number 1, put it in there. This is not saying that this is where the money is going to be spent. All the money will always come back to you guys for approval on where it's going to be spent. It just gives us a little bit more options on how it's going to best suit our community and our infrastructure to be able to spend it. Is there any questions on that?
Lots, but I don't know.
I know.
I
I know.
I don't quite understand that. I trust your
Okay.
financial.
You're suggesting it all will be categorized as lost revenue?
Yeah, so it would all be considered revenue loss standard allowance. Then from there, we can choose to do it in infrastructure. We could do it into more community projects. There's just a lot more options we have for services that we provide, where just doing it in infrastructure, we're tied to only sewer, broadband, and water, which that's not one of our services. So
Can you show lost revenue equal to that amount?
you don't have to anymore, which we could, even when we were first, Nicole and I were figuring out the calculation when they first came out with it, and we did have a majority of it did constitute as lost revenue. But now it's, no matter what, everybody can claim it up to $10 million without doing the calculation. So, I know. Well, I agree with that for the money in a whole, so.
Is that recorded?
If citizen, It's not a public hearing, but I don't know the rules on that, so. But we're not, like, right now we're not, and I do have that, before you guys leave tonight, I do have a memo from Jared, our Public Works Director, on ways that some of the ARPA funds we probably need to use on the sewer system, and something that they've already kind of designated for fixes that we need now, that I'm going to send you guys home with to read up on, and then you can converse with Jared with any questions. But we're not here tonight to approve that. We're just here mainly so that I can file a report.
When's
So,
that report due?
April 30th. And
So we won't be meeting again. So this was advertised as a discussion / motion. So we could have a motion on what Teresa explained to us.
But if any public wants to come and ask me later, I'm more than happy to answer any of your questions, okay? So.
I guess I didn't understand what kind of a motion we made. Yeah.
Well,
Motion to.
these are our, our American Rescue Plan Act funds. What category would we use that?
Yeah, Lisa's gonna make a motion.
All right, so I'll make a motion that we approve the ARPA funds designating to option 1, the public sector revenues.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. Any other discussion?
One question, do you have to do it all in one section? Can you do?
No, you don't, but we can change, what they were saying is we can change areas, so like we can go into the other ones afterwards. We just have to take this selection now, and we can move to other ones for the other categories.
So if they change their mind and do want you to account for the amount of the actual loss, can you then go back and move
Yes.
some into the public utility?
Yes. They're just saying for this first one, to do the public sector one, it has to be claimed now. They don't want you going, because this money is meant to be used over like a 3.5-year period. So they don't want us waiting till the very end and then all of a sudden being like, woohoo, we're now going to say this is revenue loss. They want to know now that that's what you're looking at. But you still can work all the money into the other areas and move it around and stuff. You just can't. Yeah.
Because if you put it in like those, you can't move it somewhere else.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
And so that's what I
If
said.
you move around.
I think the way I understand it, if you take the number 1 option, then it's up to the council basically how to spend it.
Mhm.
Even if we spend it in, say, like number 4 type items, but then there's a whole new set of rules
Of reporting
with
that I have
number
to go
4
through.
that may or may not need what you want to do with that money. So the number 1 basically gives you the option to spend it how you'd like
How
to.
many you want that
Yeah.
system or whatever.
So like if we were like a city like New York City who probably received way over 10 million, they wouldn't have the option they'd only be able to claim up to the 10 million, and then the rest of their funds would have to have been placed into other categories. For us, we did not get that much money. And so we have the option of just putting it all there and then being able to use it in the other areas still, so.
Okay, so we had a motion and a second and discussion. All those in favor?
Aye.
That was unanimous. So, okay, so we will use option 1.
Okay.
Okay, at this time on the agenda then, we'd like to again open this up for citizens' comment. This would be pertaining to anything that was not on the agenda. And so we would invite you to come to the microphone. Again, state your name, address, take about 3 minutes.
My name is Brad Turner. I live at 5027 West, 5350 South here in the great city of Denver. First, I want to thank all of you for your willingness to do this. Second, for not being intimidated by what I perceive as threats to the city and asking pertinent questions and stating that we can do what we need to do out here. We can take care of it, at least work with this. I look at these internet people and they are friends. They're working together, even though they're competitors, and I think that's the way things should be. I'd like to thank the Sheriff's Department for always being out here. And I guess if I only have 2 concerns, it's the amount of crime I'm starting to see during the nighttime, people breaking into vehicles and cars. I don't have an answer, but I guess I'd be looking for suggestions of things that we can do as a community to better watch out for that. And the second would be my perennial complaint of burn barrels every evening when I'm trying to open my windows and all I get is stinky smoke coming in. And there I don't have a solution. I really don't. I mean, if you had a helicopter and you could fly around and look down and see the smoldering, yes. But newsletters, I appreciate that, getting it out, the word out to people, and also being concerned about locking up cars and security in the city. Anyways, I appreciate all of your service. I appreciate the planning commission people for your willingness to do it and take abuse and probably lose friendship with half the people and gain a friendship with the other half. Anyways, thanks.
We do have a newsletter that's going out next week, and it does have things about the burn rules that the fire district puts out. So
big red right in the front, big letters.
We still got to have room for other stuff. I'm sorry.
Not 1930, 40 anymore. There's no more bells.
Hey, how much would it cost to get security cameras for every house with our article?
Yeah.
We don't have enough money.
We don't have enough. All right. Shoot.
They're not that expensive, so.
I like my Ring doorbell.
Are there any other comments?
Our breaking last night. Yeah, come on up.
I just want to mirror what he said. I appreciate you guys. I hope I'm not grouped into the bullying or anything like that. But I was on Facebook on the community page the other day, and I heard somebody ask about community garbage cleanup. And the thought came to my mind, if you guys had, somebody like us that could provide free dumpsters for like a window of time, and we paid for that, like out of our own pocket. Not the citizens, but just like a company. How would we go about facilitating that? Is that something you would even be interested in?
We've done it.
So I just scheduled, and that's what will be in the newsletter too, is we will be having our spring cleanup here at the Civic Center on April 30th from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m. There will be 4 dumpsters with 2 dumpsters changing out, going to the transfer station and stuff throughout the morning. We will have Public Works on staff to kind of crowd control, but that is in our newsletter that will be going out next week.
Is the city burdened with that expense? I mean, how's that work?
It's something we do budget for that expense, and so we do cover that through our budget. And Waste Management, because we are contracted with them, they do work with us also on that.
Okay.
So
Encourage, not the illegal paints and the.
and there is a list of things you cannot dump no matter what. So that will be in the newsletter. So.
Yeah, we did that for West Point. Like, we provided it one year just in the zone of the city, and we had problems with illegal stuff.
Yeah, and that's kind of why our Public Works is there to kind of help us out a little bit. No tires, things like that. So.
Is that something that you guys want more resources for? Because we would be
You
willing to.
might want to ask Jared and see if they're able to keep up with it.
Yeah, is it like hard to manage?
The first year was, and it's just kind of gotten a little less, but yeah, part of our contract, I think she said, with Waste Management, they provide the trucking and the containers, we just pay the tipping fee.
Yeah.
At the dump. So,
And they provide that for free?
yeah, as part of our contract for them to do.
We do have to pay. We do pay the tipping costs, but that's.
How long did you say that lasts?
It'll be from 8 a.m. to 1 p.m.
So
on
1
Saturday,
day.
April 30th.
Okay.
I
Well,
think it'd be nice if it was twice a year.
Yeah, twice a year would be good.
If-
So yeah.
if you guys are interested, we could probably propose something. I was thinking like zones, like maybe city zones, like we drop so many containers, this week, and then they're only there for so many days, and we take them. But we would love to help provide something.
The contractors would probably love that, because I was down in Rawson's the other day, and there's mattresses and freezers, and then the contractors.
Well, you can't actually dump freezers in our dumpsters.
I know that.
That's what other people know.
Yeah, mattresses.
That's the other joke I was gonna make. I feel like I'm providing it anyways in several cities, so we might have to actually provide it, but.
If you would.
What's the name of your place again?
So we operate under rubbish waste,
Oh, yeah.
so.
If you would like to either come in and talk to me or send me an email, I can facilitate and help conversations with that.
Yeah, but we donate them, so.
Yeah.
That would be good.
Yeah, that'd be great.
But managing it is the hard part.
Yeah.
So we would just probably do a time limit or something, and then when they're full, they're full.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, the burn barrels made me think of that again, so.
Thank you. And maybe the people won't learn as much of it.
Okay, any other comments? Okay, seeing none, we'll close public comment and entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll make a motion, we adjourn.
Have a motion?
Second.
Have a motion and a second?
Yeah, we got two seconds.
All those in favor?
Aye.
We are adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you for being here.
Here's-
big of